So, hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. So, today we're joined by John Tay of Tinman Capital. He runs community partnerships and events over there, and he's been doing an amazing job. He's absolutely crushing it in his role over there. So, John, let's just first start with you a bit about your journey. So, I was just reading one of your LinkedIn posts, and you kind of shared about how the various different stints that you went through to get to Tinman Capital today. So,
Yeah,
there's something about McDonald's, there's something about petrol pumps. So, talk us through like what was that journey like you had such a different kind of trajectory to getting into tinman and to just getting into vc, so just talk us through like what were some of those things that really helped you to get to tinman and get to the position that you are today.
thanks, Roohi. Yeah, so I started my career in McDonald's. I was 14 years old. That was pretty much my first job. I was just trying to earn some pocket money for myself. Was raised in a single parent, low income family, so it's important to me to earn my own income. So McDonald's first, and then eventually when I was 17 years old, my friend came back from a humanitarian trip in China, and then he saw that there were some needs over there, and then he came and asked me, should we do something for the children in some of the rural parts of China that I saw? And we thought of, okay, let's do maybe a donation drive. But we thought maybe it's not the best thing to do because charity drives are not sustainable, right? It's like a one-off thing. So we came up with the idea, let's sell some things, create a brand, and part of the proceeds will go towards helping people. And to launch that capital, I just went to work in a petrol station, saved up my money from there. We put together a very small amount. We started with $500, and then we started a social enterprise. So that's where really my first foray into the startup ecosystem started. So 17 years old, we launched a social enterprise called Soul, Soule, stands for a soul for every soul. The idea was to buy school shoes, right, for children in rural parts of the world. To us, it was important. The school shoes was just kind of like a message to them. It's important to keep on going to school. The startup journey grew from there. We launched our first collection with like 300 pairs of flip-flops. We were selling flip-flops in the universities, and within 3 weeks, the first batch collection sold out. And then we grew from there. It became a startup journey that lasted 7 years. And at that point, I asked myself what I wanted to do with my career, and I kind of fell in love with the startup ecosystem, and I knew that I wanted to gain more experience beyond being a founder. So there were a few boxes I wanted to tick. One on the investor side, next was on the public policy side, how the government that was working on the startup ecosystem worked, and then in the large corporation. So I did all three stints. I joined the Ministry of Trade and Industry in the strategy team. So we were in charge of evaluating the strategy of all the economic agencies, as well as studying all the trends that will affect Singapore's economy in the long term. I also worked in a fashion MNC, so we were an OEM. So we produce clothes for Western brands like Burberry, Versace, H&M, Zara, right? So I ran the Singapore office there. We launched a foundation that took care of about 2,000 workers. And in taking care of the workers, right, a lot of Western brands had more incentive to work with us as well. They knew that, this was not a sweatshop. This was a factory that took good care of the workers, not just the workers, but even their children. If they made it to university, if a factory worker couldn't afford that, the company foundation would come in and pay for that. Um, yeah, so that's my experience. And then finally now at Tin Man Capital, on the investor side of the table, and I feel like I've gained enough perspective around all sides. And yeah, this is where I contribute now as a community builder, running partnerships, engaging all the stakeholders as a VC. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you've had a phenomenal journey, like really humble journey, like just starting from like doing odd jobs and doing different kinds of jobs, and then getting into Tinman is just amazing journey, amazing feat. And would love to kind of get your take into building for Southeast Asia. Like, how can we get more builders involved in the ecosystem, and
Yeah.
how can we build this into a culture that parallels, say, the magic of SF or the magic of Bangalore or any of those other startup hubs out there? So how can we build the builder energy back to Southeast Asia?
Yeah. So I've been in the startup space for like since 17 years ago, right? Because I started so young, and I've seen how the ecosystem has evolved. When I started as a founder, there was no VCs, in Singapore. It was a really, really new concept. And there was a lot of talk about how can we make Singapore the next Silicon Valley. The likes of Google and all that, YouTube and all the tech companies growing in Silicon Valley. And the conversations was, can we recreate that here in Singapore? I think that has evolved a lot for the region. So at Tin Man Capital, right, maybe a bit about the firm. So we invest specifically in Southeast Asia. We look for B2B startups at the Series A stage. And I think from the observations of Tin Man, right, in this vantage point, the landscape of Southeast Asia is very unique. I think now we're at a point where we cannot just think about how can we be the next Silicon Valley, but because this region is so different, Southeast Asia is not one homogeneous market, right? It has distinct market cultures and regulations. So when you go to Thailand, to Malaysia, to Singapore, to Indonesia, and the likes, it's all very different. We are very diverse. We speak different languages. So it's really a very fragmented region, I would say. But at the same time, there's a lot of collaboration happening across. So that's the very interesting thing about Southeast Asia. And I think that's the thing about founders in Southeast Asia, why we are built differently. We cannot have another Silicon Valley, but founders who come out of here, from day one, they cannot just think about their home market. They need to think about how they can penetrate really different markets, right, from day one, how they can navigate all these distinct cultures and distinct markets. I think there's increasing global interest in Southeast Asia. We've seen that. There are some bright spots, Singapore, of course, as a financial hub, and for many other sectors as well now for example, like deep tech, semiconductor. At the same time, countries like Vietnam, Vietnam has done really well as a manufacturing alternative to China. They're starting to move into advanced manufacturing as well. So you see like news like Apple opening their factory over there. So all these news are happening. There's increasing global interest, and I think that will help founders to access the global markets even more. So I think that's the direction that Southeast Asia needs to move towards. And what my job is, right, at Tin Man, big part of my role is really just helping to connect because the region is so diverse, but there are really very good collaborators in the space, and you just need to identify the right people in each country and whether we can use this network and help founders to access markets and cultures very quickly, right? Help them to scale even faster, so that when they land in any of these countries, they're not just a stranger in a foreign land, but there are people who are familiar, like, oh, okay, you're from Singapore. Let me tell you about my home market. I've worked with several Singaporean founders, for example, right? So we just need to keep creating bridges across our countries and bridging that gap between startups and enterprise customers. So many enterprises have set up HQ over here in Southeast Asia, especially in Singapore. So can we create that bridge between the startups and the large enterprise customers? I think that's very critical for Southeast Asia, especially in the B2B space. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really cool what Tin Man Capital are doing, and I love the focus on B2B kind of companies. And so let's get into now the community and events aspect. So what is kind of the ROI? Like, when you host an event, like what is this ROI thing that makes you want to come back and host more events? And then how can somebody kind of create their own event in Southeast Asia? And what does it take to make a successful event? Since you've been behind some amazing events for Tin Man Capital and also through your own initiatives and other things that you've been doing on the side. So if you could just shed some light on that, I think that'd be amazing for the audience to hear.
Yeah, thank you. So I think I've been very fortunate at Tin Man. The partners, right, Jeremy and Wooly, the perspective that they have about community and events is not very common in a VC fund where you have a designated community builder. Oftentimes you see maybe that role get mixed up a bit with maybe a marketing manager instead, right? Or is it just an events executive? But I think community building is beyond events. So I've been fortunate. I've never been given a KPI where they say, John, I want you to hold X amount of events this year, and I want maybe 100 people to turn up at every event, right? That's your KPI. I've never been given that. So I can really focus on the qualitative aspect of all these events because I think community building is more than the number of people that come for your events, right? What's really important is that intangible benefit that comes from events. Okay, so the ROI of community and events is really not immediate, but it's very long term. You try to cultivate spaces and an event where people meet each other, and these relationships happen organically. Trust is created. There's deal flow happening amidst themselves, and then there's collaboration happening. So if people keep coming back and making real connection, that's when you know it's working. For me, um, one very good example I can give you, I held an event where after the event, we were all packing up, we were leaving, and then a bunch of founders were at the door. And then they were like, "Hey John, you want to go grab drinks?" And there was like maybe 6 of them, right? And they all met for the first time that day at the event. And then these guys were just going out, have drinks together. And subsequently at other events, I see them hanging out with each other, and I realized that okay, our event was a space for them to build that connection. It's not my KPI, it doesn't fit into it, but I think that's the true value of a community event, right? You really create a space for relationships. So I think that's the thing. And I think for the way I curate my events, I try not to make it one way. I think very often events are limited to like a panel. There are great panels, and there's a lot of panels happening in Southeast Asia all the time. But I think it's very one way. But can we create an event where participants have opportunity to talk to each other? And if you bring a really good speaker, can you give time for the speaker to interact with the audience? I think that's very, very important. So I think it's not just about bringing people who can talk about like motivate founders in the area of the work that they do, but content needs to be tactical. It needs to fit into their operations. You need to know what the founders want, they're looking for. Generally, they're always thinking about how to scale their sales. Very often when founders are talking, they're discussing how they handle hiring, how they even need to handle firing, right? Handle it in a sensitive way. So I think that's important. So these are problems that they can't talk to other people about, right? They can't discuss with their employees, how do I hire, how do I fire? But it's easy amongst peers to talk about topics like that. So we kind of create events like this and making sure you take note of the people who come. It's very important, the people who will come to the events. It kind of makes or break. We focus a lot about who we put on stage, but actually what makes or break the event is the people who are not on stage, right? The audience, right? So you need to build a knowledge base of all these founders who are coming and making sure that you bring the right people together. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's quite cool what you mentioned about, bringing the right folks together. It's not just about the speaker or whoever's presenting, it's about curating that audience. And I think like you've done a good job at doing that. So, as a community gatherer, how do you bring these ambitious folks together and how do you get them to actually come to your events time and time again?
Yeah. So we need to be very clear about every gathering that we do, right? Why are we doing it? Why would these people come, right? And I think having well curated gatherings help, because if you do a very open invite event, so to give you a sense, usually typically when I do an event, beyond 100 people will sign up. I actually let only 50 people come. I cap it at that. I have access to bigger venues, but I think a smaller number is always better. Even 50, sometimes I feel is too big. So depending on the topic and the number of people who are coming, and I think ambitious people, founders, right? Time is very important. You talk about valuing their time, then you also need to talk about the values that they have as individuals. You bring people with the same values together. That's when they will click. They can come from different industry, but if they have the same values, you can see connections form very easily. And I think the other things that founders are really interested in, right, like fundraising and sales and all that, can you bring people who can speak meaningfully to these topics that's close to them? Yeah, and then I think that's what keeps people coming back. And keeping it small, like I said, right, gives a sense of people knowing that, hey, it's really hard to get into a Tin Man Capital event, right? And I want to value it, the time. So we have, I think, one of the lower attrition rates for our events. We still do have fallouts. I think in Singapore, it's a very big thing because Singapore is so small, right? It's so convenient, and sometimes people are like, okay, I'll probably drop by later because it's so near. And then at the last minute, you know what? I'm just busy replying emails. I'm just not gonna show up for the event, and then they just don't turn up, right? I talk to my fellow community builders in other cities, like maybe like Jakarta, right? to get to a point for an event, it's not so direct. It's a long car ride, right? Probably the traffic jam. So you have to plan ahead, and people plan to be there, and they do show up, right? But over here, people can just cancel at the last minute. So keeping that sense of exclusivity, making sure that people know that you value their presence, then the drop-off rate decreases. And I think you need to do different formats as well. So we've done dinners. We have an event that was very well received last year. It's called There's No Free Lunch Until Now. It's called Tin Flan, right? That's acronym. So we curate the dinners. Every table we have different investors at different stages. And of course, when you bring the investors, the founders want to turn up. Usually the investors are on stage, right? And they're one speaking to maybe 100 people or 50 people, but doing it as a dinner, you just have one investor to maybe like 6 to 8 founders. So it's very targeted, and that's how you attract a lot of people to come, right? In terms of workshops and roundtables, I said I don't like to do panels. So what I usually do, I have an unpanel format. So my GPs, they come, but they are not the speakers, they are the facilitators. We break people up into small groups, and then the GPs, the VCs are there to facilitate conversation. If it goes well, I say at the start of these events, if it goes well, the GPs don't need to talk much, right? It's the founders talking. And usually you see founders asking a question, and then everyone in the crowd, it's like a collective wisdom thing, right? When people just chime in and say, I've done this, this what worked for me, or some will say, hey, I've done this, but I failed, so don't follow this path, right? Don't copy me. Yeah, so different event formats, we try to switch it up as well.
Yeah, that's quite interesting because like I've seen like some folks in India, they've done new formats as well. Like they've done like pickleball connect
Yes,
and disconnect sports, this, that, like that's kind of becoming a big thing in India.
yeah,
So yeah, it's
yeah,
interesting to see if something like that could be done in Singapore as well. Like is or probably already being done from my understanding. And yeah, just lastly, would love to get your insights on the startup walking tour. Like, is it what's the future and like what's currently happening with that initiative that you're running?
yeah, yeah. So when I have time, which is really limited nowadays, but I run this thing called Startup Walking Tour. The reason why I launched it, two reasons. One is I'm actually a licensed tour guide in Singapore. I've done this as a hobby in the past prior to joining Tin Man. Yeah, because Singapore is a space that a lot of people travel to come and see this city. And I've always had an interest to meet people from all over the world. So I thought, having a tour guide license will give me access to that. So I've run tours in the past, but they were not focused on startups. And then one day, a friend of mine, Sing, who's great, a great fellow community builder as well, she came to me with this idea, right? And she's like, hey, I read that you have a tour guide license, do you want to do this tour with me? And I thought it was a great idea. I find that a lot of people who are interested in Singapore startup ecosystem, they come here. A few places they would go, right? Besides the tourism spots, they would probably go to CBD, have some meetings in the center, the city center, right? They would probably go to Launchpad, which is kind of where Singapore started cultivating its startup ecosystem. We tried to mirror the Silicon Valley concept, right? Like people building startups out of a garage, right? So it's an industrial complex that was repurposed into a startup hub. So a lot of people visit that space as well. And I think I realized a lot of foreign founders when they come here, if they don't know the right people, they don't connect with the correct people, then they waste the entire trip. They don't come back afterwards, right? And I think that's such a shame. The other thing is if you just come here and take business meetings, but you don't learn anything about the city culture, the culture of Singapore, the history that we have. We're a young country. We're going to turn 60 years old this year. Um, it's younger than all our grandparents, right? So it's a really, really young country. If you think about it, your grandparents lived longer than this country, right? But we have come such a long way. Singapore is almost like a startup, I would say, as a country level, and we had that approach. We've always been trying new things, always iterating. If you ask anyone from any country and you ask them how did your country achieve success and growth, what resources did your country use, and then people can say things, like maybe if you're from the Middle East, we started with a lot of oil reserves, right? And that's what empowered our country at the start. But if you talk about Singapore, what do we have, right? We have nothing. We have no natural water, no natural resources. just the people and just the people with an idea, right? And then we build from there, right? So that's really the story of Singapore. So the startup walking tour, I want to welcome foreign founders who are here for the first time, give them an experience where I bring them through certain neighborhoods in Singapore. So it's not just going to Launchpad or going to the city center, but going through like a typical Singapore neighborhood, talking about our culture, talking about how Singapore tackles very essential problems like a startup would, and how we innovate and how we grow and what the people are like, how diverse our community is. We have people of all different races, right, and living in the same block. So sharing about this, I think it gives founders a very important context. And then when they think about setting up shop here in Singapore, um, I think all this context helps them hopefully encourage them, come to Singapore, build their startup here. So that's why we're doing startup walking tour. Right now, what's next for the walking tour is really pretty much anchored around conferences. Whenever there's a conference in town, a lot of people are flying in, or maybe an organization, they're bringing a group of students or a group of entrepreneurs to Singapore. Sometimes it can be foreign missions of certain governments. They're coming here, they bring maybe 20 entrepreneurs, and then they say, hey, I think this tour is a good fit for them. These people are in the tech and innovation space. Can you bring them on this tour? Then yeah, we do that. Yeah.
That's amazing. So actually, I was just looking through your LinkedIn and I saw about the Start Walking Tour. So I was like very curious to like know about it. And most of the questions actually today came from things I'd seen on your social media and the amazing work that you're doing to champion the community as like a community gatherer, not a community man per se. I think that was the distinction that you made on one of your LinkedIn posts. So yeah, amazing, amazing conversation today. And yeah, do share how the audience can get in touch, how they can learn more about Tinman Capital. Like now's your stage to kind of share regarding all that.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Roohi. I think Southeast Asia is really at a time of reset right now. I think if you follow the news, there's many things happening in Southeast Asia. It's one of probably some people call it the tech winter, and then there's been cases of very prominent fraud, right, in some large startups. And I think all these news are like a dark cloud over the ecosystem. But I think it is revealing a lot of the root issues that Southeast Asia was facing. And I think people are taking a good look at that now, and I think it's a very good time to reset. And I think in this time when everyone is resetting, it's really the all the right conditions for people to build the right way. And I hope that this new generation of founders, people who are building startups right now, is probably the least sexy time to start a startup right now. And people who are entering that space, I think they have real conviction. They have real conviction in their ideas. They have real conviction in the potential of Southeast Asia. So I think it's an exciting time for investors who are ready to invest. At Tinman Capital this year, so to share with you, like maybe on average, every year our firm we do maybe like 2 deals, right? This year we're looking to do 4 to 6 deals. So that's double or triple of what we usually invest. So we are doubling down, and we believe there'll be good startups coming up. So if you're a B2B founder, you're coming to Southeast Asia, you're in Southeast Asia, building right here at the Series A stage, come and talk to us. We invest at the early stage, and even if we don't end up investing, I'll be very happy to have you at our events. Very happy to see how we can support the wider startup ecosystem. And yeah, if there are other community builders out there, I also hope that we continue to keep building. I think this is the most important time to have communities existing. When things are tough and people are quiet, I think we should really step up and bring people together again. So yeah, I think that's why I'm looking forward to Southeast Asia for